She walked through the entrance of the small, warmly lit restaurant, balancing a tray of drinks in her hands. The soft hum of conversation and clinking glasses filled the air, a comforting background that she had grown used to over the past few months. She had been working here as a waitress for nearly a year, serving dinners, refilling drinks, and doing her best to keep customers happy. Most days passed quietly, filled with routine and small smiles from people she barely knew. Yet today felt different, though she couldn't quite say why. The restaurant was hosting a private event that evening. A crowd of people had reserved the entire dining area, a mix of local business owners, a few familiar faces from the media, and some who carried an air of influence that made others lower their voices in awe. She had prepared the tables earlier in the day, polished the glasses until they gleamed, and arranged the chairs just right. Everything was ready for the event to start, and the tension in the kitchen and among the staff was noticeable. This was the kind of event where perfection mattered, where a single mistake could leave a lasting impression. She moved carefully through the tables, setting down plates of appetizers and glasses of sparkling water, nodding politely as people smiled and thanked her. Her mind, however, drifted to the corner of the room where the grand piano stood. It was an elegant black piano, polished to a shine that reflected the warm lights above it. She had always admired it from afar, occasionally glancing at it during slow hours, imagining herself sitting there and letting her fingers dance across the keys. Music had been her first love, something she had practiced secretly since she was a child. Her parents had never had much money, and opportunities for music lessons had been rare, but she had learned what she could, mostly from old books and online videos, and had kept her skill hidden from the world. Music was her private joy, a quiet companion in her otherwise ordinary life. Tonight, the pianist scheduled for the event had not shown up, and the staff were beginning to worry. The manager, usually calm and composed, was pacing back and forth, glancing at his watch and muttering under his breath. He whispered to the head server, trying to figure out what to do. The first few moments of panic had passed, and now there was a tense silence that seemed to stretch endlessly. She could feel the anxiety in the air as she walked past the kitchen, catching snippets of hurried conversation. Then came a moment that made her heart skip a beat. The manager spotted her and called her over. She approached cautiously, unsure if she had done something wrong. "Do you know how to play the piano?" he asked, his voice tight with concern. She hesitated for a brief second, feeling the weight of the question. She had never performed in front of anyone outside her small circle of friends and family, and the thought of playing in front of a private, influential crowd was terrifying. Yet something inside her stirred, a quiet determination she couldn't ignore. I can play," she said softly, almost unsure herself. The manager raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "Are you sure? This is a private event. They expect someone professional." She nodded, her hands trembling slightly. "Yes, I can do it. I'll try my best." There was a pause as he considered her words. The pianist still hadn't arrived, and the event was starting in less than 10 minutes. With no other options, he gave a reluctant nod. "All right, you can try, but just be careful. Don't make a mistake." She swallowed her nervousness and walked toward the piano, feeling the eyes of the staff and a few early arriving guests on her. The moment she sat down, her hands hovered over the keys. The polished black surface gleamed under the lights, and she took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing heart. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, recalling the countless hours she had spent practicing in her room, alone, imagining the music flowing from her fingertips. Now, the room was filled with a different kind of anticipation, the quiet buzz of people waiting for something to happen. She pressed the first note, soft and tentative, and immediately felt a surge of familiarity. Her fingers remembered the keys, moving naturally, guided by a combination of memory and instinct. At first, the sound was gentle, almost shy, barely filling the large room. But as she continued, she gained confidence. She began to play a simple melody she had learned years ago, allowing the notes to rise and fall with ease. The soft music caught the attention of some guests, who paused their conversations to listen. A few glanced around, trying to see who was playing, their expressions changing from casual curiosity to surprise as they recognized the young waitress they had seen serving drinks just moments before. She was aware of the crowd now, not in a fearful way, but as a source of energy. Each note she played seemed to gain strength, growing richer and more expressive. The whispers among the guests became audible, small murmurs of admiration and astonishment. The manager watched from the side, his mouth slightly open, clearly impressed and a little relieved. The other staff members exchanged glances, sharing silent expressions of wonder. They had no idea she could play like this. As she continued, she allowed herself to lose track of time. The music carried her, each chord telling a story she had never voiced in words. Her fingers moved across the keys with increasing confidence, creating a melody that was both familiar and uniquely her own. The guests were leaning forward now, some closing their eyes to fully absorb the sound. Even the most reserved individuals could not hide their amazement. A few had already pulled out their phones, discreetly recording the unexpected performance. The piano, once an object of distant admiration, had become an extension of her. She could feel the resonance of each note through her fingers, each vibration connecting her to the people around her. The room, previously filled with the soft chatter of a private gathering, had transformed into a space of shared wonder. Every glance she caught from the crowd encouraged her. Every quiet gasp or subtle smile strengthened her resolve. Somewhere in the middle of her performance, she remembered a piece she had composed herself, a melody that had never been heard by anyone outside her small circle of friends. Without thinking, she shifted into it, allowing her own emotions to shape the music. The notes flowed effortlessly, a language she had always understood but had never shared. She noticed the reactions immediately. Eyes widened, hands paused mid-conversation, and people leaned closer to the piano, as if trying to absorb every sound. Her music had captured their attention completely. By the time she reached the final notes, her heart was racing, but a sense of calm had settled over her. The silence that followed was profound, almost reverent, as the guests absorbed the final echoes of her performance. She opened her eyes slowly, unsure what reaction to expect. Then came the first clap, tentative at first, followed by more, until the room was filled with genuine applause. She had never experienced anything like it. The warmth of appreciation, the recognition of her talent, and the sheer surprise of the moment overwhelmed her. The manager stepped forward, a smile spreading across his face. "I had no idea," he said softly, shaking his head in disbelief. The other staff gathered around, sharing their congratulations and expressing their amazement. She felt a blush rising to her cheeks, a mix of pride, relief, and disbelief. She had stepped out of her comfort zone, risked failure, and in doing so had discovered something transformative. Some of the guests approached her, whispering their admiration and asking questions about her background and experience. She answered shyly, still coming to terms with what had just happened. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations, praise, and repeated requests for more music. She continued to play occasionally, no longer nervous, but confident, feeling a deep connection to the audience she had never expected. By the end of the night, the young waitress realized that this one, unexpected opportunity had changed the way she saw herself. She had been brave, and it had paid off in a way she could have never imagined. The private crowd, who had come expecting a simple evening of drinks and conversation, had been treated to something extraordinary. And she, who had always been behind the scenes, had stepped into the spotlight, discovering a talent that was no longer hidden. As she finally walked back to her station, she knew this was only the beginning. The music she loved, which had been a secret part of her life, had now found its audience, and she was ready to explore what this moment could mean for her future. The applause, the smiles, and the amazed whispers would stay with her forever, reminding her that courage, even in a quiet form, can create unforgettable moments. She took a deep breath and let her fingers hover over the piano keys again. The applause from the earlier performance still echoed in her mind, but now she felt a new kind of pressure. The room had quieted down, and everyone's attention was fully on her. The guests, who had been chatting and laughing moments before, were now leaning forward, their eyes fixed on the young waitress who had stepped out of her usual role. She could feel their anticipation pressing gently on her shoulders, but instead of fear, it sparked a strange excitement within her. Her hands moved naturally, finding the keys as if they had been waiting for this moment. She started with a gentle tune, a familiar piece that she had practiced countless times alone in her small room. The notes floated softly across the room, weaving through the air and catching the attention of everyone present. Some guests whispered to one another, amazed that such a delicate, emotional sound could come from someone they had seen serving drinks just moments ago. A few people even stopped mid-sip, their eyes widening as the music sank into their minds. As she played, she allowed herself to explore variations of the melody, adding small flourishes and pauses that made the music feel alive. Each note carried her feelings, her memories, and the quiet determination she had nurtured for years. She wasn't just playing music. She was telling a story without words, one that only the heart could understand. She glanced up occasionally, noticing the expressions on the guests' faces. Some had their eyes closed, completely lost in the sound, while others stared in awe, their mouths slightly open, as if they couldn't believe what they were hearing. The music began to grow more complex, with her fingers moving faster, yet gracefully. She let her emotions guide her, allowing each chord to resonate deeply. The gentle hum of the room, which had always seemed ordinary, transformed into a quiet stage where every sound she made held meaning. The guests were captivated, leaning in slightly, sharing silent smiles or exchanging glances that said they had never expected this from a young waitress. Some quietly pulled out their phones, recording snippets of the performance, unable to resist preserving the moment. Her heart was pounding, but she had learned to use it to fuel her music rather than hinder it. She remembered the countless nights she had practiced alone, often doubting herself, wondering if anyone would ever notice or care about her talent. Now, with the room fully focused on her, all those hours felt worth it. She began to improvise, blending elements of classical pieces with melodies she had created herself. The sound filled every corner of the room, making it feel warmer, more intimate, despite the size of the space. One of the guests, an older man with kind eyes, leaned toward his companion and whispered, "I've never heard anything like this. She's incredible." His words seemed to float across the room, though few noticed. Another guest, a young woman, was visibly moved, her eyes glistening as she listened. The waitress didn't stop to think about the reactions. She was lost in the music, letting it flow freely, letting herself be completely present in the moment. She could feel the pulse of the room, the subtle shifts in energy as the music traveled through it. The music took on a more emotional tone as she reached a part of her own composition, one she had never shared with anyone. It was a melody that spoke of hope, of longing, and of quiet courage. She had written it during a difficult time, when she felt uncertain about her future, and unsure if anyone would ever recognize her worth. As she played, the notes seemed to carry her story directly to the listeners. Some guests closed their eyes, some shifted in their seats, and all of them were silently acknowledging the depth of the performance. She noticed the staff watching from the edges of the room, some with astonished expressions, others whispering excitedly among themselves. The manager was standing near the piano, his mouth slightly open, clearly impressed. He had no idea she could play like this. The head chef had come out of the kitchen, leaning against the wall with a mixture of awe and disbelief on his face. The room had transformed from a simple private gathering into a moment of shared astonishment and wonder. Time seemed to stretch as she continued to play, each note carrying its own weight and story. She lost track of the minutes, focused solely on the piano and the emotions it could convey. The guests were completely immersed, some leaning closer, some tapping fingers on the table, and a few even whispered words of praise to one another. The music had captured their attention in a way that conversation never could. Suddenly, she paused, allowing the final notes of the melody to linger in the air. The silence that followed was filled with expectation, a quiet that held everyone's breath. Then, a gentle clap broke the stillness, followed by another, until the room erupted in applause. She smiled shyly, a blush rising to her cheeks, and nodded her thanks. The sound was overwhelming in the best way, a mixture of relief, pride, and joy. The guests approached her one by one, offering words of admiration and curiosity. They asked if she had formal training, if she performed regularly, and whether she had recordings. She answered softly, explaining that she had mostly taught herself, that music had always been a private part of her life. Each compliment and question made her feel lighter, as if the recognition she had longed for was finally coming to her. A few guests suggested that she consider performing publicly, that her talent deserved to be seen and heard by more people. She listened quietly, absorbing every word, feeling a growing sense of possibility. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a life where her music could reach beyond the walls of this small restaurant. The thought was both thrilling and frightening, but she realized that she had already taken the first step by simply saying yes when the opportunity arose. The manager came over, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I didn't know you could do that," he said, shaking his head. "You've really surprised us all." She smiled, feeling a rush of gratitude for his trust, even if it had been hesitant at first. The other staff members crowded around, offering congratulations and exchanging amazed glances. They had been witness to something special, and the excitement was contagious. As the night went on, she returned to the piano a few more times, each performance more confident than the last. She experimented with different styles, blending classical, jazz, and her own melodies, each piece drawing new reactions from the crowd. The guests were enthralled, some taking turns complimenting her, others simply sitting quietly, letting the music wash over them. The room had become a shared space of discovery, a place where talent and courage met in an unexpected moment. By the end of the evening, she had become more than a waitress in the eyes of the private crowd. She had stepped into a new role, one she had never imagined for herself, and she had done it with grace, skill, and heart. The applause, the smiles, and the quiet admiration lingered in the air long after the last note had faded. She realized that this night would stay with her forever, a turning point that marked the beginning of something new. Walking back to her station, she felt a sense of accomplishment and a quiet thrill. She had faced her nerves, embraced the unknown, and discovered a part of herself that she had kept hidden for too long. The private crowd had witnessed something extraordinary, and in doing so had given her a glimpse of what could be possible. As she cleaned tables and refilled drinks, she couldn't help but smile, knowing that her life had subtly shifted, that the music she loved so dearly had finally found its audience. The memory of their faces, full of awe and appreciation, would remain with her, a reminder that courage and talent, when combined, can create moments that last far beyond a single night. The young waitress had never imagined that a single night could change so much. After the applause from her earlier performances, the energy in the room was different. The guests, who had initially come for a quiet private event, now sat fully captivated, eager to hear more from this unexpected pianist. The atmosphere shifted from casual chatter to a shared sense of wonder, almost as if the music had created an invisible bond between her and everyone in the room. She looked at the piano, its black polished surface shining under the warm lights, and felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She had played before many times, but never in front of such an attentive audience. Tonight, every note mattered. She pressed her fingers to the keys gently at first, letting a soft melody drift through the air. The room grew quiet instantly, every conversation fading as the music took over. Her fingers moved with a confidence that surprised even her. The melody she played was delicate at first, almost like a whisper, carrying a sense of vulnerability and emotion. Some guests leaned forward in their seats, their faces reflecting astonishment. The older man who had praised her earlier was now completely still, his eyes fixed on the piano, soaking in every note. She could feel their attention, and rather than letting it intimidate her, it inspired her to play with even more feeling. As she continued, she began to weave in more complex patterns, blending familiar tunes with improvisations she had created herself. Her music told a story, one of hope, struggle, and quiet triumph. The guests could feel the emotion in each note, their expressions changing as the music rose and fell. Some had tears glistening in their eyes, others smiled softly, and a few simply sat in silence, letting the piano speak directly to their hearts. The young waitress lost herself in the performance, no longer thinking about the room or the crowd. Her hands moved naturally over the keys, each chord and note flowing with ease. She played a piece she had written during a difficult time in her life, a melody that had always been private. Tonight it felt right to share it. The music carried her experiences, her fears, and her hopes, and it resonated with everyone listening. One woman, sitting near the center of the room, whispered to her companion, "I can't believe she's a waitress. She should be performing on stages, not just here." The man nodded, his eyes still wide with amazement. Others in the room were nodding in agreement, murmuring quietly among themselves about the unexpected talent before them. The young waitress noticed these reactions but kept her focus on the piano. The music was not about proving herself. It was about expressing something deeper, something that words could not convey. The manager and staff watched from the edges of the room, amazed at her transformation. She had always been quiet, diligent, and polite, blending into the background, but now she commanded attention effortlessly. Her music had a presence, a way of drawing people in and holding them there. It was as if the piano itself had been waiting for her all these years, and tonight it had finally found its voice through her. The melody grew more dynamic, building in intensity and complexity. The room seemed to respond to every note, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the sound and reflected it back with warmth. Guests leaned forward, unable to look away, completely captivated. Even those who had initially been skeptical or distracted found themselves drawn into the performance, held by the beauty and emotion of the music. She began to add subtle variations, quick arpeggios and gentle runs that showcased her skill without overshadowing the melody. The music flowed naturally, never forced, as if it had its own life. She could feel the rhythm of the room, the way the audience leaned in or held their breath, and she adjusted her playing accordingly, creating an intimate connection with each listener. As the performance continued, she noticed small gestures of admiration from the guests. A nod of the head, a quiet smile, eyes closing in appreciation. These small signs fueled her confidence, encouraging her to explore further, to let the music take her to places she had never played before. She moved through a series of transitions, each one smooth, guiding the audience through a journey of emotion, from calm reflection to joyful exuberance. The younger guests, some of whom had been scrolling on their phones earlier, were now completely engrossed. A few even started recording discreetly, whispering to their friends about the unbelievable talent they were witnessing. Conversations had stopped entirely, replaced by the shared experience of music. The energy in the room was palpable, a mixture of awe, appreciation, and quiet excitement. At one point, she glanced at the audience and saw faces that were completely changed by the music. Some had tears in their eyes, others were smiling broadly, and a few simply stared in stunned silence. The effect of her playing was profound, far beyond anything she had anticipated. She realized that music could touch people in ways words never could, creating connections that were invisible but deeply felt. The young waitress continued to play, moving seamlessly from one piece to another. She had prepared some songs, but most of what she played now was improvised, guided by emotion and intuition. Each note carried intention, each chord a reflection of her feelings. The guests responded unconsciously, swaying slightly, closing their eyes, or leaning forward to capture every sound. It was as if the room had become a living, breathing part of the music, every person contributing to the atmosphere. Her confidence grew with each passing moment. She no longer felt nervous or out of place. The piano, once a distant dream, had become an extension of herself. She could feel the resonance of every key through her fingers, the vibration of the notes carrying through her body, connecting her to the room. The performance was no longer about impressing the audience. It was about expressing herself and sharing a piece of her soul. The manager quietly moved closer, watching with admiration. He had never seen anyone command a room like this, especially someone who had been working quietly as a waitress. The staff, too, were mesmerized, whispering among themselves about how incredible it was to witness such talent firsthand. The room had shifted from a casual private gathering to an intimate concert, and she was at the center, guiding everyone through the experience. As she reached the climax of her performance, the music became more intense, with faster runs and bold chords. The energy in the room matched her playing, a silent conversation between performer and audience. The guests were completely absorbed, their emotions mirroring the highs and lows of the music. She could see the effect she was having, and it motivated her to continue, to push herself further, to explore the full range of her abilities. Finally, she slowed, bringing the music to a gentle, reflective conclusion. The final notes lingered in the air, soft and tender, leaving a quiet resonance that filled the room. She lifted her hands from the keys, heart racing, and looked up to see the expressions on the faces around her. There was awe, appreciation, and a deep sense of gratitude for having been part of something so special. The room erupted into applause, spontaneous and heartfelt, filling her with warmth and pride. Guests approached her with smiles, offering compliments and asking questions about her background. Many expressed disbelief that such talent had been hidden for so long, and several encouraged her to perform publicly. She answered softly, feeling both shy and proud, explaining that she had mostly played privately and never expected to be recognized in this way. Each word of praise reinforced the realization that she had discovered a new path, one that extended far beyond the restaurant. The young waitress felt a sense of transformation within herself. She had stepped out of her ordinary life and embraced an unexpected opportunity, discovering that her talent could touch hearts and change the atmosphere of a room. The private crowd, who had initially come for a quiet dinner, had experienced something extraordinary, and she had been at the center of it. She realized that this night was a turning point, a moment when her life shifted, and she felt ready to explore where it might lead. By the end of the evening, she had played several more pieces, each one more confident than the last. She had learned to read the room, to connect with the audience through music, and to express herself fully without fear. The guests left the restaurant with smiles, whispers of admiration, and a sense of having witnessed something rare. She returned to her station, exhausted but exhilarated, knowing that she had created memories that would last far beyond this night. The applause, the astonished faces, and the quiet moments of connection had shown her that courage, talent, and the willingness to step forward could create unforgettable experiences. By the time the evening had reached its midpoint, the young waitress had already performed more than she could have imagined. The room, once filled with quiet chatter and occasional laughter, had transformed completely. Now, every guest was focused on her, sitting in an almost reverent silence whenever she approached the piano. She could feel the energy in the room, a mixture of anticipation, admiration, and curiosity. Every glance from a guest, every subtle smile, every whisper of astonishment reminded her that something extraordinary was unfolding. She approached the piano again, this time more confidently. Her previous performances had given her a sense of rhythm and connection with the audience that she had never experienced before. The first few notes she played were soft, inviting the listeners in. She allowed her fingers to glide over the keys, creating a melody that was both familiar and new. It was a tune she had composed herself, one that carried the emotions of hope, perseverance, and quiet joy. The guests listened intently, some leaning forward slightly, others closing their eyes, letting the music wash over them. A few influential guests, who had initially seemed detached or uninterested, were now leaning in, their faces reflecting surprise and admiration. One man, who appeared to be a local entrepreneur, whispered to the person beside him, "She has a natural gift. I've never heard anything like this before." Another guest, a woman who had been quietly observing, had tears in her eyes, moved by the beauty and emotion of the performance. The young waitress didn't notice them individually, but she could feel the collective response in the room, a quiet hum of appreciation that surrounded her. She let her hands move freely over the keys, improvising as she felt the music flow through her. Each chord, each note, was carefully chosen, yet effortless, as if the piano itself knew what she wanted to express. The melody swelled, building in intensity, and the room seemed to respond with every rising note. Some guests leaned in, trying to capture every detail, while others simply sat back, letting the music envelop them. The experience was intimate, even in a room full of people, as if each listener was sharing a private moment with her through the music. The young waitress had never performed in such a setting before, yet she felt an unexpected sense of freedom. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It had become a voice for her thoughts, emotions, and dreams. She could communicate through it in ways words never could. The guests were captivated, completely unaware of the simple waitress they had seen earlier, focused entirely on the music and the story it told. She noticed a few guests exchanging astonished glances. Some of them had clearly been impressed by her earlier performances, but now they were witnessing a depth and complexity that far surpassed their expectations. She allowed herself to feel a quiet pride, but she stayed focused, letting her emotions guide her fingers rather than her ego. The music was not about proving herself. It was about sharing a part of who she was, something deeply personal and real. As the music flowed, she began to explore different styles, moving from gentle, reflective passages to more lively and rhythmic sections. The transitions were smooth, each one carrying the audience along the journey without abruptness. She could see the effect on the crowd. Some guests were swaying slightly to the rhythm, others were tapping their fingers on the table, and a few were silently mouthing the melody. The energy in the room had shifted completely, becoming vibrant and alive, all centered around the piano and the young waitress who played it so effortlessly. The manager, who had initially been nervous about her performing, watched with a mix of pride and amazement. He had seen employees come and go, but he had never witnessed a transformation like this. The young waitress, who had spent months quietly serving tables and refilling drinks, was now commanding a room of influential people with nothing but her talent and courage. The staff, too, were observing in awe, exchanging whispers and glances, clearly impressed by her ability to captivate the audience so completely. She shifted to a piece that required more technical skill, her fingers moving quickly over the keys yet never losing control. The audience responded immediately, leaning forward, eyes wide with admiration. The energy in the room intensified as she built the music to a crescendo, each note striking with clarity and emotion. The guests were completely absorbed, their previous conversations forgotten, caught in the magic of the moment. Even the quieter individuals, who had been hesitant to show their excitement, were visibly moved, their expressions reflecting the impact of the performance. After the crescendo, she slowed, allowing the music to fade gently into a soft, reflective passage. The contrast between the intensity of the previous section and the delicate calm of this moment created a profound effect on the audience. They were completely immersed, experiencing the full range of her talent and the emotions she conveyed through the piano. The young waitress felt a deep satisfaction, knowing that she had reached them in a way that words alone could never achieve. Several guests approached her quietly during the break between pieces, offering compliments and expressing amazement. One asked if she had ever performed publicly. Another suggested that she consider recording her music. She smiled, feeling a mix of shyness and pride, explaining that she had mostly played privately and never expected to perform in such a setting. The words of encouragement were overwhelming, yet uplifting, giving her a sense of possibility that she had never allowed herself to imagine before. She returned to the piano, inspired by the reactions and the energy in the room. Her next piece was lighter, more playful, with a rhythm that made the guests tap their feet or sway gently in their seats. The contrast between this piece and the previous emotional performance demonstrated her versatility, showing that she could convey both depth and joy through her music. The audience responded with smiles and soft laughter, the mood in the room shifting subtly but remaining fully engaged. The young waitress felt a growing connection with the audience, a sense of shared experience that transcended words. The music had become a bridge between her and the guests, allowing them to understand a part of her that she had never revealed before. She realized that this connection was more valuable than any applause or recognition. It was the affirmation that her talent could touch hearts and create meaningful moments. As the evening progressed, she played several more pieces, each one building on the previous, creating a continuous flow of emotion and expression. The audience remained captivated, responding naturally to the shifts in mood and intensity. The manager and staff observed with pride, their initial doubts replaced by admiration and respect. The young waitress had not only met the challenge of performing for a private crowd but had exceeded every expectation, leaving a lasting impression on everyone present. By the end of her performance, the room erupted in applause, louder and more enthusiastic than before. Guests approached her with words of praise, expressing disbelief at the talent they had just witnessed. Some asked about her background, others suggested opportunities for her to perform publicly, and a few simply thanked her for sharing such a beautiful experience. She responded with gratitude and humility, feeling overwhelmed but deeply satisfied. The young waitress realized that this night had been a turning point in her life. She had stepped out of her comfort zone, embraced an unexpected opportunity, and discovered the power of her own abilities. The private crowd, who had come expecting a quiet evening, had been treated to something extraordinary, and she had been at the center of it. She felt a sense of accomplishment and hope, knowing that this experience could lead to new possibilities and a brighter future. As she walked back to her station, she reflected on the evening and the journey that had brought her here. She had faced her fears, trusted her talent, and shared a part of herself with others. The applause, the astonished faces, and the quiet moments of connection would stay with her forever, a reminder of what courage and passion could achieve. She was no longer just a waitress. She was a performer, a storyteller through music, and this night had shown her the potential of what she could become. The following days after the private event felt surreal for the young waitress. She returned to the restaurant, performing her usual tasks of serving tables and refilling drinks, yet nothing felt the same. The echoes of the applause, the astonished faces, and the energy in the room lingered in her mind. The piano in the corner seemed to call to her, a reminder of the night when her music had touched so many hearts. Every time she walked past it, she felt a gentle pull, a quiet urge to sit and play once more. Word of her performance spread quickly. Guests who had attended the private event told friends and colleagues about the extraordinary talent they had witnessed. Some of them returned to the restaurant specifically to hear her play. The manager, who had once been skeptical, now encouraged her to perform regularly, recognizing that her talent could become a significant draw for the restaurant. Her colleagues watched with admiration and a hint of envy, realizing that the quiet, diligent waitress had revealed a side of herself that none of them had anticipated. One afternoon, a guest from the previous event approached her with an invitation. He was a local music promoter who had been deeply impressed by her performance. He suggested that she consider performing at small public events, concerts, or even recording her music. She felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Performing in public had always been a dream, but it had seemed unattainable. Now, someone was offering her an opportunity she had only dared to imagine. She continued to work at the restaurant, but her perspective had shifted. Every interaction, every task, every moment felt infused with new meaning. She carried herself with more confidence, and even her colleagues noticed the change. She would occasionally play the piano during slow hours, her music filling the empty spaces and drawing in the attention of customers. People who came in for a meal found themselves staying longer, captivated by the gentle, emotive melodies that seemed to transform the atmosphere of the restaurant. Each time she played, she felt a growing sense of purpose. Music was no longer just a private passion. It had become a part of her identity, a way to connect with others and share a piece of herself. She practiced diligently, exploring new styles, refining her compositions, and experimenting with different ways to express emotion through the piano. The hours she had spent alone learning and composing had prepared her for this moment, and she was finally able to bring her talent into the world. The more she performed, the more she realized the power of music to touch hearts. Guests would approach her after listening, expressing how the melodies had moved them, inspired them, or brought back cherished memories. She began to understand that her gift was not just about skill, but about the ability to communicate feelings that words could not capture. Every note, every chord, became a bridge between her and the people who listened. One day, she received a message from a local news outlet. They had heard about her performance at the private event and wanted to feature her story, highlighting her journey from a quiet waitress to an extraordinary pianist. She felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Sharing her story with a wider audience was daunting, yet it felt like a natural step. She agreed, understanding that this could open doors to opportunities she had never thought possible. As her music gained attention, she began to receive invitations to perform at local events, community gatherings, and small concerts. Each performance was a chance to share her gift, to touch lives, and to grow as a musician. The private crowd that had once been her first audience became a symbol of what could happen when courage met opportunity. She realized that the key was not just talent, but the willingness to step forward when the moment arrived. Her life started to change in small but significant ways. She still worked at the restaurant, but she now balanced her time between serving guests and performing. People came to the restaurant not just for the food, but for the chance to hear her play. The manager supported her fully, arranging schedules so she could practice and perform without feeling overwhelmed. Her colleagues began to respect her in a new way, recognizing the dedication and passion that had always been quietly present. Despite the growing attention, she remained humble. She remembered the first time she had sat at the piano in front of the private crowd, unsure of herself and nervous about making a mistake. She realized that courage, more than anything, had allowed her to step into a new chapter of her life. Each performance now carried that same sense of bravery, a reminder that taking a chance could lead to unexpected and wonderful experiences. As weeks turned into months, she became known in her community for her piano performances. She started to receive requests to play at charity events, school functions, and small local concerts. Each opportunity was embraced with gratitude and a quiet determination to give her best. She found joy in connecting with new audiences, observing their reactions, and understanding how music could bring people together. The shy, quiet girl who had once served tables without drawing attention had become a symbol of talent and perseverance. She also began to compose more of her own music, pieces inspired by her experiences, emotions, and the people she met. Her compositions carried a personal touch, a reflection of her journey from private practice to public performance. Guests who heard her music often commented on its emotional depth, and she felt a growing confidence in her ability to communicate through sound. The piano had become a trusted friend, a companion through the ups and downs of her evolving life. The young waitress also took time to encourage others to pursue their passions, sharing her story with colleagues and friends. She emphasized that talent alone was not enough. Courage, dedication, and the willingness to seize opportunities were equally important. Her own journey became an inspiration, showing that even in ordinary roles and seemingly quiet lives, extraordinary potential could be realized. Over time, she began to receive invitations from more prominent venues, including local theaters and cultural centers. Each new stage brought excitement and a hint of nervousness, but she approached them with the same dedication that had carried her through her first unexpected performance. She remembered the private crowd who had witnessed her first public playing, and their astonished faces remained a source of motivation and reassurance. Through it all, she maintained her humility, recognizing that every performance, every opportunity, and every acknowledgement of her talent was part of a larger journey. She continued to serve at the restaurant, blending her daily work with her growing musical career, finding balance and fulfillment in both. The piano remained central to her life, a source of joy, expression, and connection. One quiet evening, after a long day of serving guests and performing, she sat at the piano alone, reflecting on how far she had come. She played softly, letting her fingers explore the keys freely. The music carried memories of the private crowd, the nervous moments, the applause, and the quiet joy of sharing her gift. She realized that this journey was not just about recognition or opportunity, but about discovering herself and the power of music to connect with others. She understood that her story was still unfolding. Each performance, each audience, and each new opportunity added to the tapestry of her life. The courage she had found in that first moment at the restaurant piano had opened doors she had never imagined. She felt gratitude for the experiences, the people who had supported her, and the moments of bravery that had allowed her talent to shine. As the final notes faded into the quiet room, she smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. Her life had changed, yet it was still grounded in the simple joy of music and the connections it created. The young waitress had become more than a server at a restaurant. She had become a storyteller, a performer, and a symbol of courage and talent realized. The private crowd who had once been her first audience had shown her the way, and now she embraced a future full of music, opportunity, and the joy of sharing her gift with the world. Each day, each performance, and each note played was a reminder that courage and passion could transform an ordinary life into an extraordinary one.